We are in the midst, as everybody is obviously very aware of, tremendous financial tumult, and it is easy to lose sight of the things that those of us in the HR world are very much focused on. As CEOs, we're right now paying attention to preserving our credit lines, building cash, cutting costs, working on the P&L. And it's easy to lose sight of that in the midst of economic recessions, what happens post the recession is a transformation of business. Each of the last two major global recessions have been followed by tremendous changes in business practice and the business environment that we find ourselves in, and this one will be no different. When we emerge from this financial crisis and when we again resume looking at the transformation of our companies and the countries within which we operate, many things will not have changed from what they were going into the recession. Everybody here was struggling with finding sufficient talent prior to going into the recession, and it'll be a dramatic crisis coming out of it. It's easy for CEOs today to forget that we were whining just a few months ago about an unavailability of engineers, scientists, difficulty of finding the people that we needed to perform the jobs we needed to do, when today we're looking at having excess talent, excess cost inside the labor market. But when we exit this crisis, we're going to find that there are not enough educated people to perform the tasks that we need to engage in order for our companies to thrive. And at that point, CEOs, all of us being the short-sighted individuals we are, return to our HR colleagues and say, why weren't you doing something about it? And you'll say, because you told me to cut costs by 22%. What's also changing is that the leadership and the culture that we're responsible for managing is not a leadership and culture that is confined inside the walls of the company. When I've spoken to you all in audiences in the past, we've often talked about how HR has been forced by regulatory environment and by management style to focus on what I call inside the wall management, being concerned only on behalf of their permanent employees, those who are directly affiliated with your companies. But today, as I work with large companies around the world and we often perform talent audits for them, we find that today's global enterprises are entering a world in which 2 times to 3 times as many people work on their behalf as work directly for them. When you look at captive factories, leased employees, temporary employees, the independent contractors, the temporary employees, and on and on and on, companies find that their talent is more often outside of the wall than inside of the wall. And today then, when we talk about building culture, I believe that the challenge for all of us is going to be in the future, how do we build a corporate culture among the entire team, not just the employees who sit inside the walls of the corporation, which will increasingly be a smaller and smaller part of the total talent pool that we're responsible for. Very little academic research exists in this area. Corporate law often discourages us to look at how we build teams between those who are outside and inside of the wall, but I believe that the challenge for us post this current economic crisis, the transformation that businesses will be going through post-crisis will be, how do we establish corporate leadership? How do we establish corporate culture in a world in which talent is very movable, has very little direct affiliation with the companies, with the enterprises that we are responsible for, and we will be challenged to deal with issues that we haven't been trained for. How do you build community among those who have no direct affiliation? What are the HR practices that build speed to community? I've been directing now 2 PhD dissertations in this area. How do you build culture quickly among a team that assembles and reassembles itself in a question of months and thinks about its duration, its tenure with that team, measured in weeks or days rather than in years or decades? How do we build a speed to community with a permanent workforce that believes that permanent employment is in fact an oxymoron? How do we establish bonus structures that apply to those who are inside and outside of the walls? How do we build a sense of corporate ethics that encompasses employees who are bound by our code of ethics, our code of conduct, and larger numbers of individuals who are never asked to read, sign, or be aware of the code of conduct that we're responsible for. Those issues for HR departments are going to be salient post this crisis. And for those of us who take a corporate leadership role, for those of us who are responsible for the brand of our company and projecting an image, how do we do that into a world in which we have no direct communication? While we can require our own employees to watch the boring videos that we put out and to read the articles in our blogs and so on, how do we communicate to those who are outside of the walls? They're not on the company intranets, they're not on the distribution of the videos. How do we extend our vision of the world, our vision of culture? How do we establish our brand of leadership among the affiliated, loosely coupled talent pool without whom we're not going to be able to fulfill our corporate mission? CEOs and corporate leaders today are not trained on the extension of leadership outside of the walls into the talent pool. Because the world that we will face in a year, 2 years, whenever it is that we emerge from the current recession that we're in, the world will be different, the leadership challenges will be greater, CEOs will be turning to their HR department for answers. We will have spent the last 2 years struggling to bring down labor costs to make certain that our enterprises survive, but in 2 years we'll be asked to answer the questions of how do we deal with the fact that most of our talent is outside of the walls? How do we deal with a Velcro culture where we can stick people to our culture and extend it into parts of the universe that are not directly tied to us? And as corporate leaders, how do we establish leadership in a world in which we're being asked to provide leadership to those who choose whether they want to stay affiliated or continue to work with us? The challenge will not be in the future, is there an availability of talent that we can access outside of the wall? It will be a seller's market for the talent. And the question will be, how do we make ourselves as companies, where those free agents, where those individuals who can choose to work alongside us or not, make the choice that I want to work with them? We focus with our full-time employees on that question. We don't focus at all on how we build the culture outside of the walls. These are questions that I'm finding just beginning to be asked at the business schools, just beginning to be asked by the CEOs, and I look forward to us finding answers together. Again, thank you for taking the time here. I'm looking forward to the discussions. Thank you.